All righty. Welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach based here in Seattle, Washington, serving information entrepreneurs throughout the US and around the world. Welcome to another episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business. I'm super excited about today's conversation. We have not, in this broad of a scope, covered this topic on the podcast before. So very, very big welcome to John Wolpert.
Hey, nice to see you.
Good to have you, John. So before we get started, we have to give a shout out. We were just trying to recollect who introduced us, and I looked it up, and it was our mutual friend, Lou Diamond.
Lou Diamond, Thrive Loud.
Totally. Lou's been on my podcast. I've been on his. So we'll also drop a link into the show notes that will link you over to Lou's episode. Definitely go check it out. He's awesome, super fun, great energy, kind of a super connector guy. So
he's got that big Lou energy. That's for sure.
Yes, he does. Big Lou energy. He is so
positive. He's a delight. He really is. I love that guy.
Oh, he is a delight. He's the one that does like the power, he just has all this energy, and his episodes are like 20 minutes, super short and punchy. They're awesome.
Good for sales. Yeah, he's really good with sales folks and stuff like that. I'm a product guy. So he and I had an interesting conversation about the difference between a salesperson and a product person. Product people go in and neg the company by saying, hey, I'm not really interested in what you want. I just want to know if what you want is a clue into what the market needs. And customers either love that line or hate it.
Oh my goodness. Well, I bet that was a fun. Did you have a conversation on his podcast?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
We'll link to that as well. So we'll put a link to his conversation on my podcast, and then your conversation over on his podcast also. For those of you that don't know John, let's get John introduced. So John Wolpert is an esteemed speaker, writer, and thinker in technology and business innovation. As a CEO, product executive, there's the product piece, and advisor, he's been at the vanguard of technological breakthroughs from the early days of the web to the rise of artificial intelligence. That's a big conversation. John is known for founding Flywheel, a pioneer in the ride-hailing industry. His work at IBM made him a key figure in the evolution of open source software, blockchain, and AI. He's co-founded global R&D consortia and industry standards bodies, and his thought leadership on open innovation has been showcased in the Harvard Business Review. John has led countless new venture workshops and spoken before the European Union and the Australian Parliament in his mission to help organizations work together to solve hard problems.
Whoa, John, you read that whole thing.
I read the whole thing. I read the whole thing.
I think we should call ChatGPT and see if we can get that shortened. Thanks, though. I appreciate it.
Let's do. I'm kidding. But, there's a lot there. That's a big conversation. And I know when you and I first talked, it was like, whoa, tracing back to the start of your roots at the beginning of the early days of the web, we've come a long way. And this conversation around artificial intelligence right now is the conversation to be having. So I'm curious if you will retrace your steps a little bit around where did your early interest come in technology? Like, why technology and innovation? Where did that start for you?
Oh gosh, well, that back in the olden days, I was at Carnegie Mellon in '84, but I was not in CS. That came later, and I did not graduate. I graduated from Berkeley in humanities and stuff, and like back in those days, you wanted to have this wide range. So I studied neuroscience and anthropology and all this cool stuff. But most of my friends were in CS in '84, which was the birth of I don't know. We've had so many rounds in AI, but I remember everybody arguing about there were these two big approaches to what we call AI generally. One was a guy named Doug Lennett, who just passed last year. Sadly, he was a wonderful guy. I knew him. And then you might have heard of folks like the guy from Google who just left. He was at Carnegie Mellon. And
Mhm.
he had the other idea, which was sort of more about cellular automata and vectors and stuff. Turned out he was right. But now the Lenet people are getting a new lease on their approach, which kind of you might call ontological engineering, meaning for 40 years he employed English majors to teach
Ah.
computers that up is that way and up yours means something different. I mean, seriously. And so now with LLMs, that kind of ontological engineering
Mm.
and graph stuff like Neo4j is a very cool graph database for anybody that's into middleware and database stuff in your audience. I'm actually working on a graph project right now with Neo4j, and it's very exciting because when you take vectors, when you take this AI stuff, and you
Mhm.
can apply that to a graph-like world where you can say, yes, I have an intention and it's connected to this other thing and this other piece of information. You can start to see, well, graphs have been around for a long time, but they're hard for humans to deal with. But if you can get that into what we call graph rag into an AI that's using this other approach, then you've got really interesting, nuanced insights coming out, even beyond what we're getting from things like ChatGPT and that sort of thing today. So I'm pretty
Mm.
excited about that, and it's kind of cool that I wasn't in the department, but I was sort of I'm like Forrest Gumping my entire career. I was there at the beginning of Google, but I wasn't at Google. I tried to hire one of the Google founders when I was at IBM. So a few years later, they just hired all my people. So
Right. Oh
yeah,
man.
I've been around, mostly in the Bay Area, Australia, Germany, and but always, yeah, ever since Carnegie Mellon, all my friends were in comp sci, so I really got a taste for tech at that point. And
Mm.
my kids will tell you I'm pretty tech crazy, and I love to write code. In fact, I think there are engineering buddies of mine who no longer do it because
Mm.
they've already proven that they could. But I've always been a wannabe coder. I've always I know how to write code. I've learned it. But I never got sick of doing it. So whenever I get a spare moment, I like to write something. I like to build something.
Oh my gosh. So my very limited experience in the writing code world, well, actually a couple. My first experience was learning, this would have been back in the 80s on an old Apple computer, right? Putting
Mm,
in a few lines of code and then watching some design, flash across the screen, and that was pretty early. I still remember in high school, which was the 90s. I graduated in 95. We didn't have a home computer until my brother got one, probably 94, 95-ish. And I remember the first time because I learned to type on a word processor. Do you remember those word processors with the
oh, I had
little—
one. I had an old Olivetti typewriter that had a little tiny bit of memory, and yeah, yeah,
Yes, and the little tiny screen, you could see your lines scroll as you typed, and one step up from like the original old school typewriters. But when I moved the first icon on a desktop, like with a mouse, like dragged it and, dragged it across the screen, I was like, what have I done? I remember being wigged out, like, did I break something? What did I just do?
yeah.
That was in 95. Like when I went off to college, I was still learning how to email, right? Crazy.
I remember when I was a kid, my mom, who was a math genius. I mean, she had a full ride scholarship to U of M back in the days when that was unusual, and she didn't take it. She put my dad through
Ah,
school. I always thought that
wow.
was a mad idea. But she went and she took a lot of classes, and I remember her programming punch cards back in the 70s.
Yes, the big,
So
like the computers that took up like a whole room.
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, the computer wasn't in our house, but
Yeah.
she'd bring all these punch cards home.
Yep.
It was cool.
So fascinating, right? Well, and I learn enough to get by. Like even in my business, I have to learn enough about technology to make things work and get by. And but I've always built my own websites. and learn to connect like back end technology for my online businesses and stuff. And I actually learned CSS. I'm sure not every element of it. There was a particular website, I don't even know what it's called, website theme or platform thesis. I know it was Genesis versus Thesis, right? And I was learning Thesis, but you had to learn CSS to be able to build your own website using Thesis. And so that was a ridiculous little adventure. I spent way too much time going into that world, but I actually really enjoyed it. And actually being able to like visually create something at the end of that process, it was kind of like, well, that was a good learning experience. I really should have hired it out, but I super enjoyed it,
My first company was an ad agency in the late 80s. And I stupidly hired Lawrence Livermore Labs computer scientist to teach me to write a certain kind of code. And I wrote the advertising placement accounting package for the company, which is exactly not what you should be doing if you're running an ad agency. It served me later because it turned out the package I was working on, we got a lot of jobs from that. But it was a completely dumb idea. But I seem to always, I'm making that mistake, technically make that mistake right now. I'm not hiring out the work. Me and my new best friend, ChatGPT, and GitHub Copilot Workspace, which is super awesome. I think that's something that's I'm really getting woken up to right now is how far can you get as a reasonably, I wouldn't say technical, I will say technical, because people who aren't technical are really not technical. They're just not interested.
Yes.
Right. If you're interested, you can be technical. I was an English humanities major from Berkeley. If I can be technical, so can you. And I am technical. But it sure helps to have the grunt work done because the reason I wasn't a good coder when I was doing it was because I wasn't good at remembering 30 character strings in my head, and the tools sucked in the 80s and 90s.
Yes.
Now the tools are fantastic. You can build what you want. So how far can you get before you have to raise money and hire and dilute yourself with technical founders and stuff? And how far can you get to prove an idea ought to be built? And then once you've got it up and people are like, oh yeah, I hate this, or I like this, you prove it out, right? And if you can build the first terrible version of your software, then you can get to the point where you have leverage and you can then hire somebody to make it, suck less at that point. Especially if you're aware of good patterns like, MVC and not just like, there's just bad ways of writing code. So, I mean, if you can just learn a little bit about that, it's not hard anymore. It's just not. Even things like login was the worst. It used to be so hard just to do login and user management. I did that in 38 minutes. That was done. It was done. And it was high quality on Google, on GCP with Firebase. And it was easy peasy. That used to take days of really skilled people or months.
That wild. Yeah. So wild. As you look back, what have been some of your favorite, I guess I could call it either like projects or lessons? Like as you look back on your career, what are some really standout experiences that you've had?
Well, writing the book for Wiley, The Two-But Rule, Turn Negative Thinking into Positive Solutions. That was an amazing experience. Wiley was really fun to work with. I had an amazing set of editors, 4. They gave me 4 editors.
Amazing. Do you need extra or is that standard?
Well, this was a big idea book, so I was kind of on the fancy track.
Totally.
And, they got it into 300 Barnes and Nobles, and people seemed to like it. If you go to the Two-But Rule, that's the TWOBUTRULE.com, or just my website, jwolpert.com, you'll see the video that they greenlit for the book, which is hilarious. I don't know that you'd find, I was surprised that they greenlit it because it's not typical for a major publisher to allow a video of a guy grabbing his own butt in a I think the line is, so get in touch with your greatest asset for innovation. that was pretty. So they had a sense of humor, which I thought was great. And my editor, the acquiring editor, but my working editor, the one I worked with for several months, she was really funny. She'd worked on Tracy. She'd worked on the Dummies books. So she knew she really helped me with tone. And yeah, I think it worked out really well. And now I work with a company called Teamradery, which if your viewers haven't seen, it's really kind of cool. It's kind of like masterclass live for companies. Yeah. And so now a bunch of companies, every day I get another, hey, you got to be on camera for an hour with this team in this big company or this small company. And I think we're doing a lot of good. It's a funny thing, Teamradery. They've got like Gary Kasparov and Nadia Comaneci and a pit crew guy, like NASCAR pit crew will teach you how to do pit crew. A Lego person will teach you, will go through Legos. And then, yeah, so very cool. So lots of famous people and me. And my gig is to help teams do what I teach in the book, which is to really overcome negativity and naysaying, not by ignoring it, but by embracing it in a particular way, right? So that I think, I'm a Gen Xer, right? I grew up in the era of the one but society, which is, a boomer saying, but that won't work. Boom, dead, mic drop, right? Walk away, right? We didn't like that. So what do? We created a whole culture of no butism. That's not good either, right? Imagine like Apollo 13, if somebody who would, if when they suggested, the command module blows up and, or part of it, and the first idea was to turn the ship around, burn back to Earth directly. And that would have been a very bad idea. But imagine if when one of the engineers said, don't do that, somebody had said, oh, don't be so negative, right? That's not the way, right? So a no but society is as bad as a one but society. What we need is a two but society, right? Where we are in touch with each other's needs and motives behind what we intend to do, and in touch with our needs and motives that are informing our objections to those things. And then find the innovative path to square both sides, right? So it's about, really, the book is really about intentions and understanding each other's intentions, listening more deeply, but then not being afraid to say, but I don't want to do that. But we could do this other thing, right? Often people say, well, that's like yes and. And I say, no, it's not like yes and. If Hitler shows up and says what he wants to do, you don't say yes and. You say, but I think what you really want is your mommy to love you, and this will make all the mommies hate you. So, but we could get you some help. That would be a better way of doing it. Oh, yeah.
I mean, part of what is so catchy about this book, obviously, is the title. How did you boil down the essence of this work into the two but rule? What did that take for you? Like, I'd love to know a little bit about that process.
As a Gen Xer with a 7-year-old son and 11-year-old daughter, I was uniquely qualified to write a book full of butt jokes. First of all, the clinical term for this stuff is momentum thinking, and it's a serious subject. So it's a serious book, but you've got to pepper it with comedy, otherwise nobody's going to read it. And once you've seen your butts, you just can't unsee them. So I mean, it gets into the culture, and that was my intention.
Yeah.
So companies who've employed Teamradery in this way, I've done like a whole bunch of them. They seem to pepper out, or they seem to mushroom out, I should say. And so I'll work with one team, and then another team finds out, and then I'm on with them. And this is, I think, where it gets to be useful, especially because very often it's a team that's, say, in quality control, and they are always having to say, but that won't work, or but don't do that. And usually to an executive or to another team with power, like the product team, who's already down the road on what they want to do. So how do you not just green light or rubber stamp or let the bad idea percolate through the company? Amy Edmondson, who actually was part of creating Teamradery, as I understand it, or at least it was a Harvard-Stanford kind of collaboration that created this company, teamrodery.com. She does the whole, I think you probably know who she is. She does psychological safety, that sort of thing.
Yep.
A lot of that work talks about how younger or less empowered employees have to deal with more empowered leaders, and how they need to have a safe space to, provide their own input. And I think that's very valid. However, it's also valid that you don't want the experienced pilot throwing out their own experience to do what the inexperienced pilot tells them to do if it's the bad idea. So I find that in today's world, everyone is afraid of everyone, and we're all afraid of ourselves, right? So when you're a manager, the safest move a manager in a big company can make is to pat you on the head, say it was a good idea. Oh, that's a good idea. And then get out of the room as fast as possible, right? Let it die on the vine, right? That's not the way we should be doing things. There's got to be a way for a manager to say to an employee, hey, I don't like that idea, or that's not a good idea, but I would like it if. But, and even if it's a silly but, right? Even if it's, I was running a research team and we were given a big problem, and a new hire came forward with a big idea, and an engineer on the team said, but that won't work. And I said, but it would have. And they rolled their eyes and said, well, it would work if gravity was different. It's a true story. And another engineer on the team popped out of their seat a minute later and said, wait a minute, what if we do this? And that led to a very cool project, and one that got in front of Lou Gerstner, the CEO of IBM. Pretty good day. Did we solve gravity? No, that's a different story. But we did achieve innovative momentum, and that was the point.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, it's really about understanding intentions and listening deeply. And I think that's a concept. I mean, I'd be curious in your own life where you learned to listen deeply.
Oh, I'm still learning.
Still learning.
Like a lot of your viewers, I'm an entrepreneur, and done that 3 or 4 times, and been an executive in some big companies as well. But it's easy when you don't have any ideas of your own. And I have friends who are like that. They don't, it's not, and that's not pejorative. They're so much more interested in everyone else than they are in whatever they're thinking. And there's nothing wrong with that. So very easy to be a good leader because they're just so enabling of others, and they're very good listeners. But I think there's others of us who are very familiar with listening to their own voices. And some of us get good at coming up with good voices, right? Like, I'll say a lot, but sometimes it's good. When you're habituated over many years to come, throwing out, putting yourself out there, you have to learn how to put good things out there. So I think I bat a little bit better than the average when it comes to new ideas. So when you have your own ideas, but you also have to enable other people's ideas, that's hard. And one of the cool things about the 2-but rule is that, I don't know about you, but whenever I am desperate to say something in a meeting or talk or even just one-on-one, it's usually because I'm worried I'm going to forget what I wanted to say. But if you wait to formulate your second but before you articulate your first but, it's very hard to forget what you were going to say. It starts kind of finding purchase in your brain. It'll come back. So I find that's a useful trick for very energetic idea people to slow down a little bit, but not feel like they're going to lose the thing that makes them useful on the team. Right.
No, I love that. I think that waiting, I mean, I love the idea of like waiting for your second but. I think it's hard for a lot of people for the reason that you mentioned, like, oh, well, I've got to get this piece out, or I've got to express it before I forget it or whatever. But I think, generally the the process of deep listening in workplaces, let's just start in workplaces, can be really challenging. I was talking actually to my sister just the other day, whose husband is in education, and he is a principal of a like an early development, basically set of schools. So working with really young, little kids and parents who obviously care a lot about those little kids. And it turns out the vice principal of this particular portion of the district had very limited skills in listening. And so you can imagine how that went when there's a series of concerns, issues with these little people, and parents come to talk to administration about this. And she just couldn't do any listening. I mean, she'd just have to jump in and put her position in. And it caused such heat, the act of not listening, that she lost her job. Like the school district just realized, like, this is untenable. And
there is theater to this. I think that I know people who have such a high clock speed that they appear as though they're not listening, and there's an argument to be made that they aren't listening as deeply as they could.
Yeah.
Because it's not really about when you hear people say, well, you're not listening. I say that to my kids. They're like, oh, and then they quote me chapter and verse what I said.
They're like, no, I listened. I just chose not to do it,
agree.
Daddy.
Yeah, exactly. I've said that myself. I listened. I just don't agree. Right. So there's, again, two buts. I think that not talking is not the same as listening, but it's a lot easier to seem like you are. Right. So good for you if you're a non-talker, but
right.
If I'm not talking to you, then I'm probably not listening either. Right. So how do you listen deeply? Everybody has different rhythms, right? If you're from New York, you're going to be talking faster. And if you're from somewhere else, you're not. And so we have to respect each other's sense of timing. And and we also have to give each other a little bit of a break, I think, to say, hey, look, you're not a wallflower. You just have a slower sense of timing. Hey, you're not a blowhard. You just have a faster sense of timing. Right. And if we can start from there, we can remove the judgments that I think come up from both sides of that equation.
Right. That's a huge start, like respecting that difference in timing. I mean, it's also, I think, a difference for some people in their processing speeds, right? Like my son, which I've learned as a parent. My son has processed everything that's happening around him or that you've said, and he's like 5 steps ahead of you. So energetically, it's a challenging thing to keep up with on some days, but we realize, like, we just have to talk in the language of speedy processing for him and remind him, like, buddy, everybody around you is like still catching up to where you're at. And it helps a lot for him to understand that, because it is easy for him to miss social cues. Because
we don't want to be speed shaming, right? Maybe that's a thing. Hey, did we just coin a thing? Speed shaming?
Totally. It happens. Absolutely. And I think it happens a lot with children, but I still think as adults, some people just don't recognize that they are processing way faster than others. And so, like, even in this particular instance that I was talking about, this woman would just stop. The parents, like, let me stop you there, like as a way to redirect or get her 2 cents in. And it's like, this whole listening thing is a really big deal in the context of success at work, success in relationships, success in working with teams where you want the most creative, best ideas to come out of those teams.
Right. And so whether you're fast or slow, agreeing or disagreeing, the trick is being able to reflect what the needs behind the things that you're hearing are. And that, in products we say, and I think this is a great line to remember, it's always helped me in products, is this, what somebody wants is never so interesting or as important as why they want it. So, a customer or a client will tell you, especially when I was at IBM, they would be like, I want this button. And I'm like, why do you want the button is the interesting question. And maybe it's not a button you really, that I can give you a better way of getting that, even better. So why is it, important? And yeah, that's the foundation of the 2-but rule. And it's especially useful in very gnarly problems. Like, well, I mean, you're in legal, right? So my fascination, and the one I'm applying the 2-but rule to right now, has to do with, on a project I'm working on, that I'm just writing code on. It has to do with the conundrum of intentions, and in contracting and negotiation with third parties, other entities, how do you find the connections and coordinate when there is information arbitrage that you absolutely need to maintain in supply chains?
Yeah.
If I had a nickel for every project I've been involved with where we thought that we could get companies to actually give each other their data, they're not going to give you the data. Right? They're going to keep that data internally, and you have to find a way of coordinating without actually having the data. And then we say, oh, let's do an initiative to get all the supply chain data in a big honeypot. No, nobody does it for reasons, right? So, and if you don't respect the needs that are driving those reasons, then you've got a problem. So how do we, now we have some new tools with vectors, AI, and with some things like zero knowledge cryptography and something called FHE. There are new tools for being able to coordinate and even find each other, like good fits, high signal relationships, without actually exposing your information or your intentions to others prematurely.
So you and I talked about this. This is ringing a bell in our very first conversation. You talked about this.
Yeah, working on a project where yeah, you can, I mean, the applications are, in contracting, like imagine, you're writing a contract and you have a lot of intentions behind that contract that you cannot signal to the other party.
Yeah.
And they have the same, well, how could you find the synergy point without disclosing these points to each other directly? Used to require intermediaries.
Right.
Now I can confidentially talk to your digital twin without your digital twin talking to you. And then as long as
It's
you trust
almost
the system,
like a sandbox, right? Like a testing space where
yeah. In dating, you could like have your twins date each other 500 times and then decide whether or not you should ever be introduced, right? I find that to be a fascinating problem, this sort of confidential compute problem where we don't even have to trust the SaaS or the application anymore. We can do things under in a black box where not even Google has access to it. You're the only one that has access to the data. And but at the same time, we can find connections. And again, it comes back to things like graph databases and graph analytics, like Neo4j. So if you can effectively find the high connectivity in your graphs without actually exposing the data between the counterparties, it's really kind of an interesting idea.
Well, it's huge. I mean, what you're talking about, early in my career, so there's a series of books. I think you mentioned like the yes and, right? So the difficult conversations, the getting to yes, getting past no. There's a series of books written by the people who run the program on negotiation at Harvard, and they would teach these seminars to attorneys, right, to legal professionals. And so I went and studied with them for a week, an advanced negotiations course, and it was based largely around their book, Difficult Conversations, but applied in real world scenarios, right? These are folks who would get flown around the world by the US government into hotspots like international turmoil. We've got like a very limited time to resolve this before something very bad happens, right? And so it was like what you're talking about, this concept of, the thing that's being asked for is far less interesting than the why behind it. And in the legal space, it's left to the skill of the lawyers to try to figure out that conversation in order to come up with a mediated resolution or something that allows parties to meet in the middle, despite, on first appearances being as far apart as you could possibly be.
Oh yeah, and it goes all the way down to the individual and all the way up to the nation state. I mean,
Yeah.
there are techniques in zero knowledge for coordinating things like non-proliferation treaties, where we need to know that you're abiding by the nuclear treaty, but you don't want us to know everything you're doing with your nukes, right? So how do we, there's some cool math that allows you to prove things like that without disclosing the information. And I think, this sort of thing is becoming mature enough that with a fairly short order now, and we really need it, thanks now that AI is creating deepfakes all over the place. We need a way of being able to say, this is my data. I have agency over it. I own it. I own it and control it. That's where the Web3 and blockchain people were we were telling a bit of a fib, because you don't get control over an NFT. That the data behind that asset is all over the place, and you don't have control over access. If you don't have control over access, you don't really own a thing, just in law in most countries. So, but if you can say, no, I've got my data, I don't actually ever expose the data to you, but the vectors, my AI can sit in front of that, provide value to you, but you can't replicate my, there's some attacks you can do, but you can avoid them. You can basically say, look, I've never seen your data. I've never exposed that data to anybody, but the AI in front of it is informed by the data, it provides enough value to you that you can pay me for a thing, but I still maintain control over my data. Now, the problem is, if that data is in Facebook or in a centralized system, or on a totally decentralized system like blockchain, which is not a good idea either, you wind up losing control, or they've got you. So this we're walking into a near future where maybe Google or AWS or Amazon or whatever is running that container for you, but that container is confident, is locked down. You only you have the keys, and then you can say, hey, my tweets are addressed to are on my addressing, but hey, Twitter 2.0, you can have, I will open up a fine grained authorization so that you can utilize them in your platform under these circumstances, under these conditions, kind of like Substack, right? All of my Substacks are mine. I own them legally, and they're on my domain, even though they're being run by Substack. So imagine, you log into a new system, a new platform of any kind, the next FANG, the next Facebook, and you say, and the next day you get an email saying, hey, you're the proud owner of a pod. You own this pod. Here's your dashboard. We don't control it. If you want if you want it to be in Germany, you can put it. And here's, click this button. You can replicate it somewhere else, so that if I shut you off, you still have your data. And the internet knows where to find your data. That's the important thing, right? I mean, you don't want to lose your social graph, and you don't want to lose your links and your SEO, but you definitely want to participate in something that's aggregating eyeballs, like a Twitter.
Yeah.
Right. This is the future, I think, is where you own your data, you control your data, you have your own replicated pod. It's not on a blockchain. It doesn't need to be. You also have you also have authorization and identity that you can get from various sources, including, your digital driver's license, which is a thing now. And all of that kind of accumulates to your data set. And sure, yeah, Google's going to run it for you. You don't want to run your own data set on your own home server, but the legal says you own it, you control it. They don't have access to it. And some of these systems, like Google's confidential compute containers, and what Apple just announced with Apple AI or Apple Intelligence, when it goes to their cloud, they can't get access to it, even if they wanted to, because it's under advanced encryption.
Got it. So where my brain is going right now is that it doesn't seem like it's in the interest, and I know we're bumping up against time, so I'll try to keep this short. Doesn't seem like it's in the interest of big data to give up control.
It hasn't been, but now it's changing, where users are demanding it.
This is what I wondered.
Yes, and enough of us are building things. I know of a really big video game company where the CEO is adamant that if there was an easy button for letting users control their own data, they would do it. It's just that the tools for doing that are not readily they haven't proliferated and they're not accept. You can do it, but you have to be like a really good systems level developer, and you have to kind of buck the system. There's all these very popular frameworks for building applications out there and web things, and they haven't matured to the point where the option is hey, here's your container. That's
Well, I wondered if user demand is what's driving this, because it seems like a big problem, and people are increasingly, I think, less willing to just sign over everything to big data, which in the past has been the model.
These things take time to move, but they are moving.
And
we don't need fancy, shiny objects like blockchain to do it. We can do it with the web protocols that we have. We just have to have the right priorities and policies. I always say if you get the policies and priorities right, you don't need blockchain. And if you don't, blockchain just makes it worse.
Well, and this is a huge reason why people need to be involved in the conversation around AI and be contributing their voice of demanding these ethical improvements to the way that we utilize, access data, etc. John, this is such a fascinating and big conversation. I feel like we could go way deeper. It's been a joy to connect with you. I know that some folks are going to be like, where do I find John? Where do I find his 2-but rule book? Will you talk to us real quick about where you are and where people can find and connect with you?
You can find the book wherever you buy books. The 2-but rule, that's with 1 T, important, 2 B-U-T. And it's important to spell it correctly when handling your butts at work. You can also catch me at jwolpert.com, and Substack is 2 buts.com.
Perfect. We'll share all those links at the show notes. So if you're busy, you're walking around, you're driving, hop over when you get a chance to legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Check out John's episode. And John, I'm so excited that people are going to get to explore your world and hear more about this really important topic. So thank you very much for joining us today. What is your one final...
Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. What is your one final takeaway for folks, an action step, something that they can go do?
Go to Team Roddery and get yourself some time learning the 2-but rule with us, or learning how to play chess, or learning how to do a pit crew.
We'll share that link as well to Team Roddery. All right. Thank you, John. Appreciate you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. Bye.